Hello and welcome to today's presentation of Advanced Automation using Selenium. So for today's agenda, we're going to do a quick overview of Perfecto's Smart Platform offering, followed by a live demo, and hopefully we'll save some time for questions and answers. So the idea really is to be able to show you the capability of using Selenium from an automation perspective to be able to write code that does testing at scale. So real quick, I've shown you today's agenda. The challenges that are really continuous testing is, sort of complex test creation. It's one of those things that really hinders automation because a question I just got this morning was along the lines of, well, can I bring my own framework to the table? And the answer, of course, is yes. But looking at this slide, looking at some of the bullet points on this slide really is creation of the test. Sort of being able to trust that the test automation is doing what we think it's doing, maintenance of the lab itself, and actually being able to get some analytics. So these are the four pillars of what Perfecto believes helps drive continuous testing. We have a nifty little acronym for it called CELA, which is creation, which covers creation and authoring, execution, being able to execute at scale, a lab that is trusted, that can scale up to meet your requirements and has all of the security aspects. And then the analytics, right? We test at length, being able to come back in and look at some of the analytics behind testing. So my demo today will really cover, or my presentation today will really cover all four pillars of that. I've shown this slide before, the path to continuous testing. In reality, it should really look like that infinite loop at the lower right-hand corner, but in the reality we all face is it really happens to be that very broken piece in the top right-hand corner where there's a lot of tests that go on that breaks, that we discover something breaks, and then we proceed with additional testing, and it never really is that monitor, operate, deploy, release, etc., etc. So the idea behind the thought behind continuous testing really is obviously to remove the testing bottleneck. And testing bottlenecks aren't necessarily a product of the devs or the QA team or the automation team. It really is the process behind the conducting tests in an automated manner, such that there is a least amount of manual interaction that can sometimes mar the quality of the test results. So I was talking about the four pillars earlier on. Let me just go ahead and generate those. And my nifty little catchphrase, what I call CELA. So creation, I'm talking about that today. I'm going to talk about authoring tools and some of the validations behind it, the execution, orchestration and framework, and being able to scale up. The lab itself, being able to use the lab for the backbone of obviously all the testing activities, how Perfecto actually hosts the devices as well as the virtual machines within the cloud. And this really helps with scalability from a perspective of I do have some folks that say, hey, we would love to build our own, or we have our own do-it-yourself Selenium labs in our environment. And the question I typically ask is, how long do you spend on maintaining that actual lab itself? And that usually raises some eyebrows because you probably spend 1 FTE maintaining the patches, the various versions of the browsers that come along, etc., etc. So Perfecto's smart continuous testing solution, and the idea here really is to populate it, being able to offer sort of that end-to-end piece. So let's start at the very lower level where we've got this smart testing lab. So we support both browsers and desktop OS combinations from Windows and Mac OSs to real mobile devices. Obviously, the concept here is to be able to test either a native or a hybrid app within a real device, and or being able to use native Chrome or Safari browsers within Android and iOS devices, respectively. You notice that in the lower right-hand corner, we say mobile simulators and emulators are in gray. We understand the need for emulators and simulators for unit and to some degree some level of smoke testing. Those will be announced probably in Q1, Q2 of next year. And then along the lines of the smart automation, test creation, and execution, the key piece here really is obviously we're talking about Selenium today. The ability to use a framework of your choice coupled with Selenium, making sure that you obviously use the correct remote web driver calls in order to instantiate devices or browser OS sessions. And then at the end of the day, folks, we test. We test exhaustively, we test extensively, but all those testings have to yield some sort of results, because personally, I run a couple hundred tests a day. I want to be able to come in and see which test has failed. The test that passed means that I've either written my Selenium code correctly, or they've passed some sort of functional or UX testing to some degree. The failed tests are the ones of what I want to zero in on. So from a smart reporting and analytics perspective, being able to look at heat maps, being able to look at root cause analysis, either automation within the code itself that says if an element is not found through a particular error code and catch it, or being able to tag the test with the failure reason such that we can come in and group test a little later on. There's obviously integration with continuous testing platforms such as Jenkins and Travis and TeamCity and Azure Cloud. Not something we're going to touch on today, but the idea here is to be able to use the lab for browser desktop, for mobile devices, being able to create tests using any framework of your desire, as long as, again, you're doing the correct web driver calls, and then being able to come back and look at the analytics part. So I talked about the CELA. That's what we're trying to cover in this slide over here. So let's just jump in and talk a little bit about the actual code itself. So I'm actually going to share my screen. Share it. I'm going to hide that. Let's go in and pull up Eclipse, for example. So what I have here is a very simple. Let me just close some of these. A very simple responsive JavaScript that goes out and tests my local newspaper, the Boston Globe, for availability within a particular zip code, and the ability to select some trial and enter some information. So I am using the Quantum Framework. The Quantum Framework is Perfecto's contribution to the open source community, and the nice thing is, obviously, the Quantum Framework is supported by Perfecto, so it's one of those things where if we update it, we make sure it's backwards compatible, et cetera, and nothing breaks. So here you have a very simple Java inside of the Quantum Framework. I think I've got my Ruby Mines instantiated here. I happen to be using Cucumber with Ruby. Again, if that's something that is more pertinent to your organization, by all means, feel free to use that. The key piece here really is, and I want to touch on this real quick after that. And again, in this case, I'm going to use WebStorm. And in this WebStorm version, you'll see that I actually have a protractor with an AngularJS, and again, same Quantum Framework. But the idea is, if you're more of an Angular, or your site requires Angular, being able to use protractor to test against that. But the couple of key pieces here really is, in this particular Angular test, you'll see that the Selenium address is testing against my demo environment, which is the demo perfectomobile.com environment. The base URL is what I'm actually going to go test against. I parameterized my security token. We made it a lot easier. Rather than trying to pass in username and password, let's just pass in a security token such that it does all of the authentication for you. In this case, I have a particular script name. It's just called a protractors Windows VM. You notice that is something I happen to use across the board. And in this particular case, I'm running it against Windows 10 Chrome latest. Chrome releases probably on average about 42 to 46 days. I can never remember it, so I'll just say latest. Over here, I've selected Chrome 70, 71, Edge 17, Edge 10 against Windows, Edge 18 against Windows 10, and so on and so forth. So the idea here really is, again, if you need protractor to test against AngularJS, by all means go ahead and use this. If you simply need a responsive test, by all means use Java against the Quantum Framework. I'm just going to kick this off while we look at a bunch of other things. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this particular test. And in this one, I've selected 9 browser OS combinations to run against. This will run about 130 tests, so we'll just let that brew for a while. And let's come back to Eclipse. So the one thing I talked about earlier on is, in this case, in Java, I've got this remote web driver. And again, I'm pointing to my demo.perfectomobile.com URL. And this is, for all intents and purposes, the endpoint. This is where I want to run my test against. This is that L. This is the lab I talked about, right? So browser and desktop and mobile devices all reside within this lab, and it's all dependent on how I call it. So speaking of calling it in this very simple test, and I've commented it out correspondingly, so you'll actually see devices and device capabilities are defined within this case, within the break section, and here characteristics of the device for that test going to be run is selected. So in this first particular case, I'm actually running it against an iPhone 7 that's running iOS 10. The phone is physically located in the Boston data center. I've got some resolutions, manufacturers, and models, etc., configured within this particular case. The key piece here really is the case name, which I'm calling iPhone 7, and the device ID. I'm saying go run it on this particular iPhone 7 because that's what I want to run it on. It actually has iOS 10. And for those of y'all that are familiar, the nice thing about the iPhone 7s is it'll actually run just about all versions of iOS from 10 all the way up to 13. So iPhone 7s are a great utilitarian device to have out there. And over here, I've gone ahead and just selected the Chrome latest, and in this case, I'm running it on Windows 10, Chrome latest, and at a particular resolution within the U.S. East Data Center. I've just selected a very simple iPhone 7 and the Chrome latest. I talked about passing my security token earlier on. Here I've defined my timeout as 30 seconds. And then wind tunnel personas allow testing of location, network coverage, and other applications. So if I was actually testing what we call wind tunnel persona, in this case Georgia, is I am on Wi-Fi. I walk into an elevator. I've lost all connectivity. How does my app or my URL behave itself? And then I step out into the street and I go from basically Wi-Fi to 4G or 3G. So wind tunnel personas or wind tunnel capability is something that Perfecto has added to Appium and Selenium in order to ensure that we can do some of that network virtualization testing. And then over here, I've defined a few reporting capabilities. I do want output video to be captured and output reporting to be turned on, and obviously my script name to be Boston Globe plus target environment. If I actually had Perfecto Connect Transport Layer Security Tunnel, I would actually enter the tunnel ID over here. And Perfecto Connect is for predominantly, I would say, one-off desktop testing from my ID environment. For most of the corporate customers out there, we would encourage them to establish a point-to-point VPN. That way, the connection is always established, and at the end of the day, your IT security folks, Mr. Customer, will be happy because they get to control where traffic from the endpoint within your organization gets to roam within. And so what I'm doing here next is I'm instantiating the web driver against my demonstration environment. I talked about this, my demo.perfectomobile.com. A small piece of catch, try exception over here, that is if I fail to acquire the browser selection. And then obviously some additional timeouts that I've put in there. But this little piece of code over here that says don't forget to take my screenshot, the idea here is to be able to take snapshots or screenshots as I progress from test to test or from sections of the test within sections of the test. So here my test name is called the Boston Globe. I have opted to generate, if I need to, 4G LTE good, or to generate a HAR file if so desired on the existing device. And here I've got a couple of variables that I want to enter data into. Obviously my home page, my zip code, selection of length, enter details, so on and so forth. I'm again doing some sort of catch for an exception over here. And so my test really starts over here, right? So within this little section over here, you notice that I'm calling it, obviously, open my home page. A Reportium client is, again, part of the quantum framework, so I'm basically saying, in the start step, mark it as open page. I'm doing a little system out print such that I can actually see it within my console itself. And this is the actual URL I'm going to. I'm going out to subscribe.bostonglobe.com. It's got a couple of parameters behind it. I said, don't forget to take my screenshot. And then within my Reportium client itself, report that as the step end for home page. So anything that I happen to do in here gets captured within that step itself. Here I've got I'm entering a zip code. As you can see, again, I'm doing the same thing with my Reportium client. I'm actually printing something out on the screen. But the key piece here is I did a driver find by element on the actual text zip itself. and I'm actually clearing it, and then I'm going to enter a Boston zip code 02110, and then I'm actually going to click on the click button, but actually instantiate the click button. Again, same things over here. And I'm not going to go into too much detail in here, but you can see I'm doing the same thing. Basically, I'm doing most of my fine element by XPath because I think that's one of the least brittle ones versus element by ID or CSS or whatever locators your developer or dev team happens to send to you for locators. And here I'm sending a couple of pieces of information like TAN, my address, my phone number, etc., etc. And below that, I've got a couple of other pieces that basically have my always run equals true. Nothing out of the ordinary. Standard Selenium code in here that actually happens to run against these two combinations that I've got selected over here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and run this test as a Maven test because obviously it's Java inside of the Quantum framework. And as soon as I see my trying to acquire my Chrome latest and my iPhone 7, what I can do is then switch over into my test analysis. So this is what you'd actually see when you sign into the Perfecto cloud. This is the A piece and the sealer, my test analysis. So one of the things I can do is I can actually go into live stream and see those tests actually running. So it's still running the end of my protractor test, but let's go ahead and look at this test on the iPhone 7. And what you'll see is when I select inside of the live stream, you'll actually see the test running. My hands are not touching the keyboard, folks, I promise you. You'll actually see the test running inside of that iPhone 7. It's a real physical device. It's located in our Boston data center, actually Lowell, if you're familiar with the area, and it's actually going to go ahead and run that test for me. And as soon as it's done, it's going to release the device, do a quick cleanup, and that subsequent test report is going to be available inside of my report library. Now, you saw a window pop up earlier on, and basically in the time that it took me to explain what my Java code was doing, I actually ran 198 tests, 100 of them failed, and the reason for that is I have little spaces in my assertion that causes it to fail, but 86 of those 198 tests passed in the space of 15 minutes. So the beauty of the Perfecto Smart Continuous Testing Solution Lab is the ability to spin up, in my case, 9 virtual machines to run 198 test combinations across those various browser OS combinations in the space of 15 minutes. Again, your mileage may vary, as we say, but the idea here really is the scalability of the lab to be able to burst up and handle a fair amount of tests in the short period of time. So I'm going to go back into my report library, and here you see that this test is still wrapping up, so you can see the execution is being processed. The report will be available soon. But this test concluded on the iPhone 7, so I'm actually going to go select that test. And you'll see where I actually define it, right? In my test steps, I defined open home page, I defined enter zip code, I defined obviously all of the test steps in here. So for any one of them, say for example, in terms of being able to do this, you'll see that I entered, I did a set find. I'm entering various pieces in here. I entered my web inspector. I did my tab. I came in here and I actually looked at, ID equals phone 3. So being able to subsequently capture that data. And the nice thing is being able to play back. We're visual creatures. I want to be able to say, hey, Joe, when I clicked on this button, that's not what I got. And usually Joe's going to go, what do you mean that's not what you got? Can you show me a video? Can you tell me what's going on? So here, you notice that as I play back the actual video capture itself that I specified in my code, you notice the test flow is moving along, and actually I get to see what's happening on the device as the test is running, even though the test is run through conclusion already. A couple of quick things over here. This device I don't believe has been set because it's running 10.0.1. I don't believe it's been set for HAR files, but I can certainly capture HAR and PCAP files that are viewable inside of Wireshark. I can actually capture the device log that shows me CPU utilization, Wi-Fi network bytes in, bytes out, all of the usual device logs and statistics that are available there. We also have the Jira capability, so I can create a bug in Jira if this test had failed and it's something that I need to send back to the dev team. It is a two-way interaction. I'm not going to get a lot of notes from there, but I may get a number next to Jira that says, some action was taken or it's been handed off to someone else. And then obviously the ability to look at some of the information, say, for example, all right, so this test took about 23 seconds to run, It was executed by me. Here's the driver execution ID, automation framework with Selenium, so on and so forth. But the idea here, again, is I can go look at the execution. I can go look at the actual device itself. So here's the device ID, a couple of other pieces around it. I can show desired capability, which is something I would necessarily put into my code itself. But the nice thing is this: if you're using a common repository, like Git, is the ability to come in and say, let me go look at the source file for this test itself. And because this code does exist in Git, so the basic premise is, even though it exists on my IDE on my desktop, I can certainly come in and look at the code itself and see exactly what's going on from the perspective of being able to look at content that's been shared or pushed. And then last two things really is, if the test happened to fail on the device itself, I can now come into the actual iPhone 7. It is not an iPhone 7, but the actual iPhone 7 that this test run on, and open the device and maybe interact with it manually. I want to see what happened, because if automation is reporting a failure, can I come in and manually interact with the phone? Was it because during the authentication piece I slid over, biometrics required, and what basically happened was it's sitting there waiting for a valid thumbprint, and that's why the test failed. In which case we would have to make modifications on our own. The other thing I can do too is certainly come in and say, "Whoops, excuse me, I did not select enough manuals. I did not select enough tests." But being able to come in and say, "Show me how the test behaved against various browser OS combinations." I'm just going to go select these 4 right now, or these 3 right now, and say compare now, and you'll see that again for a particular test step, I can see how it did on various. This one was Windows 8.1. This one was a Windows 7. This one was a Windows 8.1. So being able to look at custom cross reports within the analytics itself. Last piece really is heat map, being able to come in here and say, all right, so show me device models. I can certainly come in here and clear it or filter additionally in terms of being able to show, say, for example, Chrome or Internet Explorer, or being able to select by operating system, show me Android or iOS, and so on and so forth. So the ability to filter the models is key. But let's come back and look at the code itself, because this is the fun one. So in this case, I've defined an iPhone 7 and a Chrome latest, and I talked about burstability or bursting capabilities that we saw inside of the AngularJS with the protractor code. So one of the things I can do is I can certainly come in here. Do I have my notepad open? Yes. So I have all of these other browser OS combinations selected in here. So I've got Chrome latest -1, Firefox, etc., etc. Just let me go ahead and copy that. Come back into Eclipse right about here. Paste all of that in there. So what I've done now is I've gone ahead and gone from just one browser OS combination to adding a bunch more, right? And I want to show you what that actually looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and save all of my tests and rerun this. Hopefully I didn't forget a close quote someplace. But in this case, now what you're going to see is, what did I do wrong here? It's still running my iPhone 7 and my Chrome latest. Because what basically happens is, even though I've added a bunch of additional devices in here, what I failed to do was tell my test.ng XML to go ahead and grab all of the other devices, because you'll see there's an iPhone 7 and a Chrome latest in here. So there's 2 components, and there's usually multiple components in terms of the test suite itself. Again, I'm using Eclipse. The 2 pieces that I want to play with predominantly are my test home delivery Java and my test XG XML. So let me go ahead and grab the right ones here, the corresponding ones. Back into my code, and so within here, right, so now I've gone ahead and added all of the pieces that are necessary to call all of the browser OS combinations I've just added. So let me go ahead and save that one more time. And while this test is running, I really don't want to layer another test on top of it. I can certainly go ahead and stop it, but you know what? In the interest of testing, we'll let this run through completion. But the idea here really, again, is in my very simple quantum framework, I've gone ahead and defined for you a very simple test in Java that does responsive testing. That is, it'll actually go out and touch run Safari on an iOS device against a particular web property. And then I've also shown you the ability to, within the same test itself, be able to go ahead and call in a bunch of different browser OS combinations as well. So let's go ahead and see how that test is currently running. Look at my live stream. Looks like the Chrome test is concluded. Go into my report library. Looks like it's wrapping up over there, and as soon as that's done, I'll basically come in and rerun the test with a whole slew of other browser OS combinations. So one of the things we can do, and let me show you this while I have some time, is you'll notice that I've got this iPhone 7 and some of the capabilities listed over here. Now, how I get these capabilities really is I go into my manual testing, for example, and over here you notice I've got I've got 54 mobile devices allocated to me. Let me go grab an Android device. So in this case, say for example I wanted this Google Pixel 3 that's in the UK. Right. One of the things I can do is I can open the device, which would put me into a manual interactive mode with the device itself. Or one of the things I can do is I can click on it and see that so it's being used as a device right now. But when I click on capabilities, one of the things you'll see here is in JavaScript I have that, so I can certainly say I want to look at it from a Java perspective, and I've got all my capabilities in there. If you happen to want to look at it in Python or Ruby or C# or PHP, all of those things are in there. So I'm actually going to select Java, copy it to clipboard, come back into my notes, and then all the way at the bottom here actually paste it. So you'll see that I'm calling an Android device. It's running Android 9. It's actually in my UK data center, has a specific resolution, and obviously is called the Google Pixel 3. What's missing from this is the device identifier, which I can then basically come back and say, show me the device ID. So it actually shows me that, which is what we see over here, and I can copy it to clipboard again, come back in here, and obviously paste it at the bottom over here. So one of the things I can do is I can certainly come back here and remove this, copy all of that, back into my code. So over here I can say, right, so what I've done is helps if I can type Pixel. I've just basically added a Google Pixel into my test case. Now, adding it here is one thing, but again, remember we've got to be able to add it in here as well. So I'm going to come back in here, and I'm just going to copy this, paste that in there, and just call it my Google Pixel. Done. I'm going to go ahead and save this and rerun my test. Hopefully it didn't catch some of my typing errors too badly. But what we're going to see now is actually going to go ahead and acquire Edge latest Google Pixel, Firefox, Chrome latest, iPhone 7. So very quickly, and I know I should have typed each one of these individually, but what I wanted to do was show you the capability of bursting. That is, I went from one browser, Safari browser instead of an iOS device, and a Chrome latest into a whole bunch of desktop OS browser combinations, as well as being able to add an Android device into my particular test. So again, we're going to let this run through completion, or we can certainly come in here, and you notice that Google Pixel is in use, right? If I actually look at my devices, close this out, where's my iPhone 7? My iPhone 7 is also in use. So again, it's a shared pool, but you get to see the concept behind a device actually being used. I will go back into my lab and look at my live stream, and I should see a bunch of these Boston Globe tests running against the test that I've defined. So if I wanted to go select this Chrome one, for example, I should actually see that running Windows 10, Chrome 75 at 1280 by 1024. So the idea here, again, just to recap real quick, is for you to be able to use, in my case, RubyMinds, if I wanted to use Cucumber with Ruby, being able to use Angular with Protractor, and then being able to use Java against my quantum framework. Nothing out of the ordinary here. The piece I wanted to come across really is the ability to create tests with any Selenium code-based framework in multiple languages. And again, I'm using Quantum. You can certainly use something that's developed within your organization that your developers or automation engineers feel comfortable with. And then here you'll see, let me refresh this, and here you should see a bunch of my tests actually running or coming to conclusion with the actual run itself. And for this particular one is Firefox, latest -168, looks like I had an element not found. Again, if I wanted to actually drill down and go look at my test, it looks as though my WebDriver element within the enter zip code didn't like it. So right out of the gate, I opened the home page, which is fine. And then as I proceeded to enter my zip code, I basically said unable to locate the element. So at least this error message is commiserate with the actual element, with the actual error that wasn't found. So I've got the unable to locate element within the test itself. So that being said, I just wanted to make sure that we understood the various frameworks that can be used against the various languages. Nothing out of the ordinary over here. As far as questions, let me see. Let me finish this last slide, and then we can proceed to questions and answers. So smart creation, I think this is the key piece I wanted to touch on today, was automation creation that again matches your team's abilities and skill sets. Appium, Selenium, which is what we talked about today. If you're in another session, we will cover XUI tests and Espresso for Android and iOS, obviously native app testing. But the key piece here is the ability to allow you to create and author and modify those tests according to the skill sets within your organization. So what I've tried to cover today is the smart creation, or the C aspect of the four pillars of Perfecto Smart Continuous Testing Solution. We talked about the smart creation, where the creation of the test automation scripts and the authoring of them can be done, again, with any framework you happen to be familiar with, any framework that matches the skill sets of your automation or test engineers. And the nice thing is you're not just required to do Java or JavaScript or C#. Whatever language your organization is familiar with, please feel free to use that with respect to the creation and authoring of the actual test scripts itself. And then, really, from a smart web testing perspective, we talked about some of the ability to do validations, being able to do security from the L aspect of the lab, and then the Codeless Selenium we'll touch on another time. But the results analyzer, the analytics, being able to come in and look at test results after the test is run, I think is key. And being able to look at live stream, being able to see the test that's currently running. I use that as an invaluable tool, because at the end of the day, I'm writing a bunch of scripts. I'm running it. It says that it's gone ahead and acquired the specific devices, but I really would like to visualize and see how that's actually running on the screen itself. So let's pause here for some questions and answers. I think this is always interesting. Here we have a question around, can I use C# in a Visual Studio Editor? And the answer is yes, you may certainly do that. We've got a huge financial institution here in the greater Boston area that's actually using a custom framework written in C#, and they're actually using the Visual Studio Editor against that. Another question I typically get around this is, do I have to use the Quantum framework if I'm trying to use something like WindTunnel? And the answer is yes and no. And the reason for that is the WindTunnel personas are automatically built into the Quantum framework. That way I can call it. But if you're using something other than the Quantum framework, you still have the ability to call WindTunnel capabilities, but that requires a little bit more coding on your aspect in order to get that. One more question I typically get is, what if I don't get the locators from the developers? That's always a tough question because at the end of the day, if we're a team, I'm hoping to be able to get the locators from them. But within the Perfecto manual testing itself, we have something called Object Spy, or if you happen to have Appium Desktop, the ability to just run that, or Xcode, being able to go in there and fire up the application and being able to look at the XPath of the CSS in order to help you with authoring or creation of the test script itself. I think that's all I have for questions. That's all I have for time today. Folks, thank you for again, joining me for today's presentation of advanced automation using Selenium. Appreciate it. I hope to see you all next time on another one of these webinars. Have a great day, everybody. Goodbye.